Altamont A Novel by Joseph Holder. In memory of all those who dared to love across the lines, the world drew between us. Forward. In December 1969, music promised to change the world. The counterculture was in full bloom, long hair, loud guitars, love without borders, and the dreamers believed it could last forever. But on one cold day at Altamont Speedway, that dream bled into the dirt. This novel doesn't just tell you what happened. It drops you into the smoky record stores, the crowded parks, and the fragile spaces where young love dared to cross America's deepest fault lines. Altamont is not a history lesson, it is a heartbeat. It has the rush of a first kiss to the soundtrack of the Stones, the sting of a world determined to keep lovers apart, and the slow realization that sometimes the songs we live for can also write our endings. Joseph Holder has done what most writers only hope to achieve. He's taken a moment in history we thought we knew and made us feel it again. Whether you remember the era or are discovering it for the first time, this story will haunt you long after the last page. And because this story was always meant to live beyond the page, the author built an original soundtrack, the same one he hears as the scenes unfold. Every track was chosen for a reason, each becoming a character in its own right, shaping the tone, the rhythm, and even the fate of Marcus and Lily. You can listen to it exactly as arranged while you read, letting the music carry you deeper into their world. The playlist L Ink and QR code are included at the end of the book, and in the press materials Turn It On, Turn It Up, and Step into 1969. Chapter 1. Echoes of Silence. The morning lay hollow, painted in muted grey hues, as dawn broke over Altamont Speedway. A ghost of what had been roared here less than 24 hours ago now lingered in silent wreckage, the trampled remains of blankets abandoned in haste, half-empty wine bottles shattered across dry dirt, and the eerie stillness that clung to the empty stage looming over the field. The wind carried the faintest smell of smoke, embers cooling from hastily extinguished fires. In the distance, a solitary flower tilted in the breeze, its petals trembling against the bleak canvas of dirt and debris. Its defiance was almost cruel, a fragile piece of beauty, surviving amid a battlefield of broken dreams. Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence played somewhere in Lily Sanders' mind, not truly audible, but as though memory itself had stitched it into this place. Each note ghosted. She saw it in flashes. The crush of the crowd, the roar of guitars, Marcus's blood on her hands. Her pulse quickened even now, anchored by a grief that seemed to have no bottom. Chapter 2. Smoke and Velvet. The bell over the door of Spin City Records jingled in soft defiance of the summer heat, ushering Lily Sanders into the dusky confines of a world suspended between decades. The air was heavy with incense and the worn leather scent of old vinyl. Hendrix shredded from the speakers, his guitar a wail sharp enough to rattle the dusty glass of the front window. Marcus Johnson stood half-turned at the soul and R&B bins, each movement precise, fingers tracing familiar grooves, head nodding faintly with quiet approval as he pulled up records one by one. His shirt was pressed, loafers spotless, but there was an untamed glimmer in his sharp brown eyes. Lily noticed him before he noticed her. This wasn't the first time she'd come here, but today it felt charged. She lingered near the rock section, pretending to flip through records while stealing glances. When their eyes finally met across the narrow aisle, something electric passed between them. A recognition that neither could quite name, but both felt in their bones. Marcus held up the Temptations album he'd been examining, and Lily responded by showing him her copy of Let It Bleed. "You don't strike me as the type to need Cloud 9, Lily said, sauntering closer with the confidence of someone who'd grown up believing the world belonged to her. Marcus raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her directness. "And you don't strike me as the type to need bleeding. Maybe I like things a little messy." "Yeah, I can tell." Their verbal sparring continued, each testing the other's knowledge and convictions about music, about life, about the invisible boundaries that were supposed to keep people like them apart. By the time they agreed to trade albums for a week, she would take his Temptations, he would take her Stones. Something had shifted in the atmosphere of the little record store. "Tell you what," Marcus said, his voice carrying a challenge wrapped in velvet. "Take Cloud 9, I'll take Let It Bleed. Next week, same time, notes." Lily grinned, sensing the game within the game. "A whole week? What, scared I'll be right?" "Nah. Just like proving people wrong slowly. Cocky. Confident." They traded records, their fingers brushing for just a moment longer than necessary. The electricity was undeniable. "If you fall in love with this album, I'm rubbing it in forever," Lily said, clutching his Temptations record like a prize. "And if I hate it, then you've got no taste, and this thing's over before it starts." Marcus chuckled, but he didn't deny it was a thing. Dave, the aging hippie who owned the place, watched from behind the counter with the knowing smile of someone who'd seen countless romances begin among his vinyl bins. But he'd never seen one quite like this. The well-dressed black boy from Oakland and the free-spirited white girl from the other side of the bay, drawn together by their shared love of music and their mutual refusal to accept the world's limitations. As Lily left with Sarah, her best friend peppered her with questions about the cute guy she'd been talking to. But Lily found herself reluctant to explain what had just happened, partly because she wasn't sure she understood it herself, and partly because she already sensed that what was beginning between her and Marcus was too precious to be subjected to other people's opinions. Marcus remained in the store for another hour, ostensibly browsing, but really just processing what had occurred. The Stones album felt heavy in his hands, not just the vinyl, but the weight of possibility it represented. His sister Karen would tease him about his white music phase, and his friends would raise eyebrows if they saw him with it. But something about the girl, Lily, she'd said her name was, made him want to understand her world better. That night, both of them lay in their respective bedrooms, listening to unfamiliar music and thinking about a stranger who had somehow made them question everything they thought they knew about themselves. Chapter 2.5. The Exchange. 1 week later, Lily found herself standing outside Spin City Records 15 minutes early. Marcus's copy of Cloud 9 clutched in her hands like evidence of some beautiful crime. She'd listened to it every night since their encounter, sometimes alone in her room with headphones, sometimes on the family stereo when her father was working late shifts. Each time, she discovered something new, a bass line that made her heart race, harmonies that seemed to wrap around her thoughts, lyrics that spoke to parts of herself she was only beginning to understand. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and there he was, leaning against the counter in conversation with Dave, the store owner. Marcus looked up when he heard the bell, and his smile was like sunrise breaking through fog. "Right on time," he said, though they both knew she was early. "Actually, I'm early," Lily admitted, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at the confession. "So am I." Marcus held up her copy of Let It Bleed, the Rolling Stones' faces staring out from the album cover, with a characteristic mix of rebellion and world weariness. "I've been here for 20 minutes. Dave chuckled from behind the counter. "Both of you have been circling this place like sharks all week. I was wondering when you'd finally show up." They found a quiet corner near the listening booths, settling cross-legged on the floor with the albums between them, like offerings at some musical altar. The store was quieter today, just a few browsers flipping through records, the soft scratch of something jazzy playing from the speakers overhead. "You first," Marcus said, nodding toward the Temptations album in Lily's hands. Lily took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been swirling in her head for 7 days. "Okay, so I have to admit something. Before this week, I thought Motown was just pretty sounds for pretty people. Background music for people who didn't want to think too hard." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I was wrong," she continued. "This album, it's not background music at all. It's foreground music. It demands that you listen, that you pay attention to what they're saying." She opened the album cover, running her finger along the track listing. Take the title song. "When I first heard about something called Cloud 9, I thought it would be all dreamy and soft. But it's not. It's about escape, about finding something better when the world around you is falling apart. And the way they sing it, with all that grit and soul, it's like they're not just singing about Cloud 9, they're fighting their way there." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. "What else?" "The whole album feels like revolution in a suit and tie. It's got the same anger as the music I usually listen to. But it's dressed up, controlled, channeled into something more powerful, because it's so precise." She looked up at him. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Marcus said, and something in his voice made her feel like she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. "Your turn," she said, nudging Let It Bleed toward him. Marcus picked up the album, studying the cover for a moment before speaking. "I'm going to be honest with you, Lily. This scared me at first." "Scared you?" "Yeah, because it's..." He paused, searching for words. "It's everything my parents warned me music could become. Raw, dangerous, unpredictable. The kind of sound that makes people do stupid things." Lily felt a flicker of disappointment, but Marcus wasn't finished. "But then I kept listening, and I realized that was exactly the point. This album isn't trying to be safe or comfortable. It's trying to tell the truth about things that are uncomfortable. And sometimes the truth is messy and bloody and hard to hear. He flipped the album over, pointing to the track listing. There's this song on here, Gimme Shelter. First time I heard it, I thought it was just noise. But by the third listen, I understood what they were doing. They're singing about the end of the world, but they're doing it with this groove that gets under your skin. It's like they're saying, yeah, everything's falling apart, but we're gonna dance while it burns. That's exactly what I love about them, Lily said, excitement creeping into her voice. They don't pretend everything's okay. They look right at the darkness and make music out of it. Right, and the way Jagger sings, Marcus shook his head, in what might have been admiration or bewilderment. Man sounds like he's been to hell and back, and he's reporting on the trip. It's not pretty, but it's honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each processing what the other had said. Around them, the record store hummed with its usual afternoon energy. Browsers shuffling through bins, the occasional clink of albums being reshelved. Dave's radio playing something soft and familiar. Can I ask you something? Lily said finally. Sure. What made you pick up that Temptations album in the first place? I mean, you could have chosen anything. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the album cover. My dad, he said finally. He used to play Motown all the time when I was little. Sam Cooke, Smokey Robinson, The Temptations. But he always played the older stuff. My Girl, The Way You Do the Things You Do. Songs about love and happiness and everything being beautiful. But that's not what Cloud 9 is about. Exactly. When this album came out, he wouldn't play it. Said it wasn't real Motown, that they were trying to be something they weren't. Marcus looked up at her. But I bought it anyway, because I wanted to hear what they had to say about the world I was actually living in, not the world he wanted me to live in. Lily felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of shared territory she hadn't expected to find. My parents hate the music I listen to, too. They think it's all noise and rebellion for rebellion's sake. Is it? She considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense. Sometimes you need music that sounds like how you feel inside, even if how you feel inside isn't pretty. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe that's what all good music does, regardless of style. It tells you the truth about something, even if the truth isn't what you want to hear. So what's the truth about you, Marcus Johnson? The question slipped out before Lily could stop it, more personal than she'd intended. Marcus met her gaze, and for a moment she saw past the careful composure he usually maintained, glimpsed something vulnerable and searching underneath. The truth about me, he said slowly, is that I'm trying to figure out how to be myself in a world that has very specific ideas about who I'm supposed to be. The truth is that I love music, all kinds of music, because it's the only place where those rules don't seem to apply. What kind of rules? Marcus glanced around the store, as if checking to see who might be listening. Rules about staying in your lane, about not reaching too high or wanting too much, about being grateful for what you have, instead of dreaming about what you might want. Lily felt something tighten in her throat. I hate those rules. Yeah? What rules are you trying to break? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The ones that say I should be satisfied with being pretty and polite and invisible. The ones that say I should want the same life my mother had and her mother before her. The ones that say asking questions makes you difficult and being difficult makes you unlovable. They looked at each other across the small space between them. Two teenagers who had somehow found their way to the heart of something important without quite knowing how they'd gotten there. Can I tell you something? Marcus said. Anything. I've been thinking about you all week, not just about this. He gestured to the albums, but about you. About the way you listen to music like you're trying to solve a puzzle. About how you're not afraid to admit when you're wrong about something. Lily felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. I've been thinking about you too. Yeah? Yeah? About how you take music seriously without taking yourself too seriously? About how you can talk about important things without making them sound like lectures. She paused, gathering courage. About how you make me want to be braver than I am. The silence that followed was different from the comfortable quiet they'd shared earlier. This silence was charged, electric, full of possibilities neither of them had quite dared to name. Lily, Marcus said finally, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Yeah. Would you maybe want to do this again? Not just the album thing, but this. Talking. Getting to know each other. The answer was yes. Had been yes. Since the moment she'd walked into the store and seen him smile. But instead of saying it immediately, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of paper. What's that? My phone number, she said, feeling bold and terrified in equal measure. In case you want to call me sometime, maybe we could listen to music together instead of separately. Marcus took the paper like it was made of something precious and fragile. I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. As they stood to leave, albums tucked under their arms, Lily felt like something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. A week ago, she'd been a girl who listened to rock music and wrote poetry and felt like she was sleepwalking through her own life. Now she was someone who had shared honest thoughts with a boy who listened to different music but understood the same truths. Same time next week? Marcus asked as they reached the door. Actually, Lily said, surprising herself with her boldness. What are you doing this weekend? Marcus grinned, and the expression transformed his entire face. I was hoping you'd ask. Outside on the sidewalk, they stood for a moment in the afternoon sun, both reluctant to walk away from whatever had just happened between them. Thank you, Lily said finally. For what? For taking my music seriously, for taking me seriously. Thank you for doing the same. As they finally parted ways, heading in opposite directions down the busy street, both of them carried with them the knowledge that something had begun. Not just attraction or friendship, but understanding. The recognition that they had found someone who spoke the same language, even if they'd learned it from different teachers. In her bag, Lily carried Cloud 9 and the promise of a phone call. In his pocket, Marcus carried Let It Bleed and a piece of paper with 7 digits that felt like a map to somewhere he'd never been but desperately wanted to go. Neither of them could have known that they had just laid the foundation for a love story that would be both beautiful and brief, that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world they lived in. All they knew was that they had found each other in a record store on a summer afternoon, connected by music and curiosity, and the brave decision to tell the truth about who they really were. The rest would unfold in its own time, in its own way, with all the joy and heartbreak that comes with daring to love someone the world doesn't want you to love. Chapter 3. Golden Gate Promises. Golden Gate Park stretched out like a breathing canvas alive with sound. Drummers in a circle pounded rhythms that reverberated through the trees. Groups sprawled across tie-dyed blankets, their laughter mingling with the scent of grass and sweet smoke. Lily and Marcus settled beneath a sprawling oak, his guitar case open beside him. She watched him strum, fingers deft and confident, while the distant hum of voices and music seemed to press in from all sides. His song wasn't polished, it was raw, unguarded, and it belonged here, in this park, alive with its own beat. "What's that?" she asked, when he paused between chord progressions. "Something I've been working on. It's not finished yet." "Sing it." Marcus hesitated, then leaned in slightly, his voice low and rich as honey. The words were about searching, about finding something you didn't know you'd lost, about the way music could build bridges between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. When he finished, Lily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "Now you," Marcus said, nodding toward the leather notebook she always carried. "I don't know. Come on. Fair's fair." Lily flipped through pages filled with half-finished thoughts and fragments of dreams until she found what she was looking for. Her voice was softer than his, more uncertain, but the words painted pictures of a world beyond the one they knew, a place where love didn't have to apologize for itself, where people were judged by the content of their hearts rather than the color of their skin. They spent the afternoon trading songs and stories, building the foundation of something that felt both inevitable and impossible. Other park-goers came and went around them, hippies and activists, musicians and dreamers, all of them drawn to this place where the normal rules seemed suspended. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Marcus and Lily walked hand in hand toward the edge of the park. They didn't talk about what was happening between them, didn't try to define it or measure it against the world's expectations. They simply let it be. This fragile and beautiful thing that was growing in the space between them. Chapter 4. Lines We Can't Cross. Marcus's room was immaculate compared to the world outside. A neat bed, walls lined with vinyl records and posters of Otis Redding, Sam Cooke, and Marvin Gaye. Civil rights clippings were pinned up, headlines screaming progress and resistance side by side. Lily sat on the floor, legs crossed, surrounded by the warmth of him. His presence was grounding. They talked about music, dreams, what it might feel like to leave town behind. His voice was steady, but she could hear the longing threaded through his words. "My sister thinks I'm crazy," Marcus said, adjusting the needle on his record player as a Temptations song filled the room. "Dating a white girl in 1969. She says I'm asking for trouble." "Maybe we are," Lily replied, but there was no regret in her voice. "Maybe trouble's worth it if it means we get to be together." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Mrs. Johnson's key in the front door. Marcus tensed immediately, and Lily saw something shift in his posture. A subtle but unmistakable change from relaxed to alert. "Stay here," he whispered, then slipped out to intercept his mother before she could discover Lily in his room. Through the thin walls, Lily could hear their muffled conversation. Mrs. Johnson's concerned questions, Marcus's careful answers. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "She knows," he said simply. "What did she say?" Marcus sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "She's worried. Not about you. About what could happen to us. To me." Lily felt the weight of that concern settle over them like a shadow. She'd grown up in a world where her biggest worry was whether her father would let her borrow the car on weekends. Marcus lived with dangers she was only beginning to understand. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Every day," he admitted. "But I'm more scared of not being with you than I am of whatever might happen because we are together." They held each other in the gathering darkness, two young people in love with each other and at war with a world that couldn't understand why that should be enough. Chapter 5. Jazz and Whiskey. The Blue Moon. Jazz Cafe sat tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in Oakland, its neon sign flickering weakly against the October dusk. Sarah had been talking about this place for weeks. How it was the real deal, where real musicians played real music for people who actually listened. "Come on, Lil," Sarah had urged that afternoon. "Live a little. Besides, I heard there's this gorgeous bartender there who looks like he could be in a movie." Lily had laughed, not knowing that Sarah's gorgeous bartender was about to become the most important discovery of her evening. The club was everything Sarah had promised: dimly lit, intimate, thick with cigarette smoke, and the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like you were part of something important. A small stage dominated one end of the room, where a trumpet player was working his way through a Miles Davis number that seemed to make the very air shimmer. At the bar, Marcus Johnson wiped down glasses with practiced efficiency, his movements smooth and confident. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a thin black tie loose around his neck. When he looked up and saw Lily walking in with Sarah, his face broke into a smile that could have powered the entire neighborhood. "Well, well," he said as they approached the bar. "Fancy meeting you here." "You didn't tell me you worked here," Lily said, settling onto a bar stool and trying not to notice how the other patrons were watching their interaction with interest. "You didn't ask." Marcus set two glasses on the bar. "What can I get you, ladies?" "Something strong," Sarah said immediately. "It's been a hell of a week." "Two whiskey sours coming up," Marcus said, his hands already moving to gather the ingredients. Lily watched him work, mesmerized by the easy grace with which he moved behind the bar. This was clearly his element. He knew where everything was without looking, could carry on a conversation while mixing drinks, and somehow managed to make even the most routine tasks look like art. "How long have you been working here?" she asked. "About 8 months. Started washing dishes, worked my way up." He slid their drinks across the bar. "Pays better than the record store gig, and the hours work with school." "School?" Sarah perked up with interest. "Oakland Community College, pre-law, if you can believe that." Lily felt a flutter of surprise. She'd known Marcus was smart, but somehow she hadn't pictured him as the college type. It was another layer to discover, another reason to be intrigued. "A lawyer who plays guitar and mixes drinks," she said. "That's quite a combination." "Man's got to have options," Marcus replied with a grin. The evening flowed around them like music. Sarah charmed her way into conversations with other patrons, her natural extroversion making her an instant hit with the regulars. Lily stayed at the bar, content to watch Marcus work and steal conversations between his duties. "So, this is where you disappear to," she said during one of his quieter moments. "Not much disappearing involved, just trying to make enough money to keep the lights on." His voice carried a note of something, not shame exactly, but an awareness of the realities that shaped his choices. "There's no shame in honest work," Lily said quietly. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Most people your age don't see it that way." "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, his voice soft. "You're definitely not." The trumpet player finished his set to scattered applause, and the stage was briefly empty. Marcus glanced at the small, upright piano in the corner, then back at Lily. "You want to hear something?" he asked. Before she could answer, he'd come around the bar and was walking toward the piano. The other patrons watched with interest as he sat down and began to play. Not the song he'd been working on in the park, but something deeper, more complex. His voice, when it came, was richer here, more confident, filling the small space with a warmth that made everyone stop talking and just listen. Lily felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. This wasn't the boy from the record store or even the dreamer from the park. This was Marcus the performer, Marcus the artist, and he was magnificent. When he finished, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Marcus smiled, acknowledging it with a small nod, then returned to the bar as if nothing unusual had happened. "Show off," Lily said, but her voice was full of admiration. "You ain't seen nothing yet," he replied, and something in his tone promised that this was just the beginning. As the evening wore on, Lily found herself seeing Marcus in an entirely new light. Here, in his element, surrounded by music and people who appreciated what he could do, he seemed more fully himself than she'd ever seen him. The careful control he maintained in other settings fell away, replaced by an easy confidence that was absolutely magnetic. "We should probably get going," Sarah said eventually, checking her watch. "It's getting late." Lily nodded reluctantly. She could have stayed here all night, watching Marcus work, listening to the music, pretending they existed in a world where their being together was the most natural thing imaginable. "Will I see you again?" Marcus asked as she prepared to leave, the question carrying more weight than it should have. "Count on it," she replied, and meant it completely. Outside, walking to Sarah's car, Lily felt like she was floating. "Okay, spill," Sarah demanded as soon as they were out of earshot. "Who is he? And why haven't you told me about him?" Lily looked back at the club, its neon sign painting everything in soft blue light. Through the window, she could see Marcus behind the bar, back to his work. But somehow the entire world felt different now. "His name is Marcus," she said finally, "and I think I'm falling in love with him." Sarah stopped walking. Lily ... "I know," Lily said, understanding all the warnings her friend was about to voice. "I know all the reasons why it's complicated. But Sarah, when he plays music, when he looks at me like I'm the only person in the room." She trailed off, not having words for what she was feeling. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then put an arm around her friend's shoulders. "Well," she said finally, "if you're going to fall in love with someone impossible, at least he's talented and gorgeous." Lily laughed despite herself. That's one way to look at it. As they drove home through the Oakland streets, Lily pressed her face to the window and watched the city lights blur past. Somewhere behind them, Marcus was finishing his shift, probably thinking about her the same way she was thinking about him. The thought made her feel reckless and terrified, and more alive than she'd ever been. Chapter 6. Dinner Table. War. The Sanders dining room was a polished cage. Lily stared at her plate, appetite gone. Tom Sanders carved his steak with mechanical precision, each scrape of knife on porcelain, sharp enough to flinch at. Jake slouched casually, smirk plastered across his face, enjoying the tension. "So," Jake began lazily, "who's the guy, Lil?" Tom's head snapped up. "What guy?" His voice was all steel. Jake's grin widened. "Saw her downtown. Some kid from Oakland. Plays soul records." Lily's chest constricted. She met her father's glare squarely. "His name is Marcus." The silence shattered into shouting. "Marcus what?" Tom demanded, his fork clattering against his plate. "Just Marcus." Tom's face darkened as the implications sank in. "He's colored." "He's not colored, Dad. His name is Marcus, and he's a person." Jake chuckled, clearly enjoying the fireworks. "Jesus, Lil. Guess you wanted to make Dad's blood pressure explode." Tom rose from his chair, towering over the table. "You are not to see him again." "Watch me," Lily shot back, her voice rising to match his. The argument escalated quickly, years of tension between father and daughter finally finding an outlet. Tom's police training had taught him to see the world in terms of us and them, safe and dangerous, and Marcus Johnson represented everything he'd been taught to fear. "As long as you live under my roof," Tom began. "Maybe I don't want to live here," Lily interrupted, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Tom's hand moved faster than thought, catching Lily across the cheek with a sound like a gunshot. She stood there for a moment, one hand pressed to her burning face, staring at her father with a mixture of shock and disgust. Then she turned and walked out of the room, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. In her bedroom, she threw clothes into a canvas bag with shaking hands. She'd crossed a line tonight, and there would be no going back. The girl who'd sat down to dinner with her family was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen love over safety, uncertainty over the comfortable prison of her father's expectations. She climbed out her bedroom window into the cool night air, leaving behind not just a house, but an entire way of being in the world. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, finally and completely. Chapter 7. Brotherhood. The basketball court at Bushrod Park was cracked and weathered, its chain nets hanging like old memories in the Oakland afternoon sun. Marcus dribbled lazily at the three-point line, waiting for James to finish tying his shoes. This had been their ritual for 3 years now. Every Saturday when the weather was decent, they'd meet here to play one-on-one and talk about whatever was weighing on their minds. "You been distracted lately, man," James said, straightening up and reaching for the ball. "Something eating at you?" Marcus passed him the ball, then moved into defensive position. "Just thinking." "About what?" "Life, the future, whether any of this matters." James shot from the top of the key, the ball swishing cleanly through the net. "Everything matters, brother. Question is whether you're paying attention." They'd known each other since junior high, when James had transferred to Marcus's school from Richmond. James was everything Marcus wasn't. Loud where Marcus was quiet, quick to anger where Marcus was measured, ready to fight where Marcus preferred to talk his way out of trouble. But somehow, their differences had made them perfect friends, each one balancing what the other lacked. "You remember when we first met?" Marcus asked, catching James's return pass and driving toward the basket. "Course I do. You were getting your ass kicked by those idiots from West Oakland, and I came in swinging." James grinned at the memory. 3 against 2 seemed like better odds. "We both got suspended for that fight." "Worth it, though. Showed those fools they couldn't mess with us." Marcus made his shot, then turned to face his friend. "What if I told you I was seeing someone complicated?" James raised an eyebrow. "How complicated? We talking?" "White girl complicated." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. James was quiet for a long moment, spinning the basketball on his finger while he processed this information. "Damn, Marcus, you don't do anything halfway, do you?" "It's not like I planned it. It just happened." "Things like that don't just happen," James said, his voice carrying a note of warning. "You got to choose to let them happen. Question is, you ready for what comes with that choice?" Marcus thought about Lily's face when she talked about music, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new. He thought about the feeling of her hand in his, the way she listened when he played guitar, like his music was the most important thing in the world. "I think I might be," he said, finally. James studied his friend's face, reading all the things Marcus wasn't saying. "She good to you?" "Better than good. She sees me, you know? Not what she expects me to be, not what the world tells her I should be. Just me." "And you love her?" It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. "Yeah, I do." James nodded slowly, then passed the ball back to Marcus. "Then I guess we better make sure you don't get yourself killed over it." They played in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of the game allowing them both to think. James had always been Marcus's reality check, the one person who could tell him hard truths without sugarcoating them. If anyone was going to understand the risks Marcus was taking, it would be James. "My cousin Darryl," James said during a water break. "He dated a white girl up in Berkeley a couple years back. Smart girl, pretty, from a good family. Thought they were being all progressive and shit." Marcus waited, knowing there was more to the story. "Her family cut her off when they found out. His family wasn't much better. And the streets. Man, the streets got opinions about that kind of thing. They broke up after 6 months. Too much pressure from all sides." "What happened to them?" "She married some lawyer from Rowan County. He's working construction, drinking too much, and pretending he never loved her." James's voice was matter-of-fact, but Marcus could hear the sadness underneath. "Some stories don't have happy endings, brother." Marcus bounced the ball against the asphalt, the sound echoing off the surrounding buildings. What if this one's different? What if it's not? They looked at each other across the court, two young black men who'd grown up understanding that their choices came with consequences other people never had to consider. The weight of history, of prejudice, of a world that sorted people into categories and punished those who dared to cross the lines. "I can't live my life being scared," Marcus said finally. "If I do that, then they win, without even trying." James smiled, and for the first time since the conversation started, it reached his eyes. There's the Marcus I know, stubborn as hell and twice as idealistic. "You think I'm crazy?" "I think you're in love." "Same thing, most of the time." James grabbed the ball and took a shot from half court, missing by several feet. "But if you're gonna do this, you better be smart about it. And you better be ready to fight for it, because the world ain't gonna make it easy." "Will you have my back?" James looked at his oldest friend, saw the hope and fear and determination warring in Marcus's face, and felt his own heart clench with protective love. They'd been through everything together, fights and failures, dreams and disappointments. Whatever came next, they'd face it. The same way they'd faced everything else. "Always," he said simply. "You know that." They finished their game as the sun began to set, painting the Oakland sky in shades of orange and purple. Walking back to their cars, Marcus felt lighter somehow, as if sharing his secret had made it more real and less frightening at the same time. "Just promise me one thing," James said, as they reached the parking lot. "What's that?" "Promise me you'll be careful. Not just with her, but with yourself. Love makes people do stupid things, and you can't afford to be stupid. Not in this world. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what his friend was asking. I promise. As they drove away in opposite directions, both young men carried with them the knowledge that their friendship had just deepened in a way that would bind them together, whatever storms might come. James would keep Marcus grounded, and Marcus would challenge James to see beyond the limitations the world tried to impose on them. Neither of them could have known how much they would need each other in the months ahead, or how their bond would be tested by forces beyond their control. But in that moment, driving through the familiar streets of Oakland with a taste of basketball and brotherhood still fresh in their mouths, they both felt ready for whatever came next. Chapter 8. 4 Voices, 1 Song. The Fillmore Tavern wasn't much to look at from the outside, just another neon sign competing for attention on a busy San Francisco street. But inside, it pulsed with the kind of energy that drew musicians and music lovers like moths to flame. The walls were covered with concert posters and album covers, and the small stage in the corner had seen everyone from local blues legends to touring folk singers. It was Sarah's idea to come here, of course. She'd heard about their Thursday night open mic from a friend of a friend, and the prospect of hearing Marcus play in front of a real audience had been too tempting to resist. "Come on," she pleaded with Lily over coffee that afternoon. "It'll be fun. Besides, James has never heard Marcus play, and Marcus has never met James properly. It's time for a proper group hang." Now the 4 of them sat crowded around a small table near the stage, nursing beers and watching an earnest young man with a harmonica work his way through a Bob Dylan cover. James had been skeptical about the whole evening. He wasn't much for folk music or white establishments. But Sarah's infectious enthusiasm had worn down his resistance. "This place is groovy," Sarah announced, taking in the atmosphere with wide eyes. "Very authentic." "Authentic what?" James asked with amusement. "You know, authentic scene, like real artists come here." Marcus laughed, relaxing for the first time all evening. He'd been nervous about introducing James to Lily and Sarah, worried about how their different worlds might collide. But watching Sarah try to impress James with her knowledge of the local music scene was surprisingly endearing. "So Marcus tells me you're studying pre-law," Lily said to James, trying to bridge the conversation gap. "That's right. Oakland community, same as this fool." James nudged Marcus with his elbow. "Though I'm thinking more about criminal defense, maybe civil rights law. Make some real change in the world." "That's incredible," Lily said, and meant it. "The world needs more lawyers who actually care about justice." "World needs a lot of things," James replied. But his tone was warming to her obvious sincerity. The harmonica player finished to polite applause, and the MC, a bearded man in his 30s, who looked like he'd stepped out of a Kerouac novel, took the microphone. "All right, beautiful people, who's brave enough to share their soul with us tonight?" Sarah immediately turned to Marcus, her eyes bright with anticipation. "This is it. This is your moment." Marcus shook his head firmly. "I'm not getting up there." Why not? Lily asked. You're better than half the people who play these places. That's not the point. I don't do the whole performing for strangers thing. But that's exactly what you should do, James said, surprising everyone. You got talent, man. Real talent. Hiding it under a bushel doesn't help anybody. Marcus looked around the table at his three friends, all of them looking at him with expectation and encouragement. The MC was still calling for volunteers, and Marcus could feel the moment stretching out like a held breath. I'll make you a deal, Lily said suddenly. You get up there and play one song, just one, and She paused, thinking. I'll let you pick the next 3 albums I have to listen to. No arguments, no editorial comments. That's a terrible deal for you, Marcus pointed out. Maybe I'm feeling generous. Sarah clapped her hands together. Oh, this is perfect. Marcus, you have to do it now. It's like a romantic gesture thing. James rolled his eyes at Sarah's enthusiasm, but Marcus could see he was fighting back a smile. Don't let us pressure you, man. But if you're going to do it, you better do it now before you lose your nerve. Marcus looked at Lily, saw the faith and love shining in her eyes, and felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe it was the beer, or the warmth of being surrounded by people who cared about him, or simply the realization that some moments were too important to let fear win. One song, he said, standing up before he could change his mind. The walk to the stage felt like miles, even though it was only a few steps. The MC handed him the guitar, a battered acoustic that had seen better days, but still held its tuning. And Marcus settled onto the stool with his heart hammering in his chest. The crowd quieted, maybe 30 people turning their attention to the young black man on stage. Marcus could see his friends at their table, Lily leaning forward with her hands clasped, Sarah practically vibrating with excitement, James nodding encouragingly. This is a song I've been working on, Marcus said into the microphone, his voice steadier than he felt. It's not finished yet, but sometimes you got to share what you have, even if it's not perfect. He started with a simple finger-picking pattern, letting the melody establish itself before his voice joined in. The song was about bridges, literal and metaphorical, about the spaces between people and the music that could span them. His voice, rich and warm and honest, filled the small room like honey poured over rough edges. But it was when he reached the bridge, a section he'd never played for anyone before, that the magic really happened. His eyes found Lily's across the room, and he sang directly to her, the words painting pictures of late-night conversations and shared dreams, and the possibility of love surviving in a world that didn't want it to exist. The room was completely silent except for his voice and guitar. Even the bartender had stopped moving, glass frozen halfway to the shelf. This wasn't just another open mic performance. This was someone bearing their soul in 3/4 time. When he finished, the silence stretched for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Then the applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic, people calling out requests for more. But Marcus only had eyes for his table, where Lily was wiping away tears, and James was nodding with approval, and Sarah was bouncing in her seat, like she might levitate from pure joy. Thank you, he said into the microphone, then stood and handed the guitar back to the MC. The walk back to their table felt different than the walk up. Longer in some ways, shorter in others. By the time he sat down, Marcus felt like he'd crossed some invisible line, stepped into a version of himself he'd always known was there, but had never dared to fully inhabit. "Holy shit, Marcus," Sarah breathed. "That was incredible." "Language, Sarah," Lily said automatically, but her voice was thick with emotion. James just nodded, the gesture carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "That's what I'm talking about, brother. That's what the world needs to hear." "How do you feel?" Lily asked quietly, reaching across the table to take his hand. Marcus considered the question seriously. How did he feel? Exposed, certainly, vulnerable, but also exhilarated, like he'd just discovered he could fly. "Free," he said finally. "I feel free." The rest of the evening flowed around them like music. They talked and laughed and argued about everything and nothing. Sarah regaled them with stories from her job at the boutique. James shared his plans for changing the world through law. Lily read them a poem she'd been working on about the way city lights looked like fallen stars. As the night wore on, other performers took the stage, but none of them captured the room the way Marcus had. People kept glancing over at their table, and more than one person stopped by to compliment Marcus on his performance. "You should do this more often," suggested a woman with long grey hair and paint-stained fingers. "The world needs more honest music." After she left, Marcus shook his head. "I don't know about all that." "I do," Lily said firmly. "She's right. What you did up there, that was magic, Marcus. Real magic." "Magic's just talent that people don't understand yet," James added. "And brother, you got more talent than most people see in a lifetime." Sarah raised her beer bottle in a toast to Marcus for being brave enough to share his gift with us mere mortals. They clinked bottles, the sound ringing out like a bell in the crowded tavern. Marcus felt something warm and bright expand in his chest, a feeling he would later recognize as the moment when their little group truly became a family. "Your turn next time, James," Marcus said. "I want to hear some of that poetry you write when you think nobody's looking." James nearly choked on his beer. "How did you?" "Man, I've known you for 3 years. You think I don't notice when you're scribbling in that notebook during lunch?" "It's not poetry," James protested. "It's more like observations, social commentary." "Sounds like poetry to me," Lily said with a grin. "And I want to hear Sarah sing," Marcus continued, enjoying the way his friend was squirming. "I heard you humming the other day, and you've got a voice." "Oh, no," Sarah said, waving her hands dramatically. "I only sing in the shower and in my car. Those are the rules." "Rules are made to be broken," Marcus replied, feeling bold and reckless and completely alive. They stayed until closing time, reluctant to let the evening end. Outside on the sidewalk, the cool San Francisco night wrapped around them like an embrace. The city was still alive around them, cars passing, distant music spilling from other clubs, the occasional couple walking hand in hand down the street. "This was perfect," Lily said, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. "Absolutely perfect." "We should do this every week," Sarah announced. "Make it a tradition. The four of us, different places, sharing our art with the world." "I'm not sharing anything with anybody," James said, but he was smiling. "We'll see about that," Marcus replied, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't going to let the subject drop. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Sarah catching a ride with James back to Oakland, Marcus driving Lily home to her friend's apartment, where she'd been staying since the fight with her father. There was a moment of perfect understanding between them. They had become something more than the sum of their parts. These four young people from different worlds who'd found each other through music and chance and the simple human need for connection. "Same time next week?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus said, and meant it completely. Watching James's car disappear into the San Francisco night, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost took his breath away. For the first time in his life, he had everything he'd ever wanted: music, friendship, love, and the courage to share all of it with the world. He had no way of knowing how precious and fragile this moment was, how soon it would all be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. But standing there on the sidewalk with Lily's hand in his, and the echo of applause still ringing in his ears, Marcus Johnson felt like the luckiest man alive. Chapter 9. The Altamont Proposition. November came to the Bay Area with surprising warmth, Indian summer stretching the year's gentleness well past its expected limits. Marcus and Lily sat on the steps of the Berkeley campus library, their textbooks spread around them like offerings to the academic gods. Marcus was supposedly studying for his constitutional law midterm, but he kept getting distracted by the way the afternoon light caught in Lily's hair. "You're not reading," she observed without looking up from her own book, a collection of Sylvia Plath poems that she'd been working through for her English class. "I'm reading. I'm just reading you instead of Marbury vs. Madison." Smooth talker. But she was smiling as she said it. They'd been spending more time on campus lately, partly because the library was free and quiet, but mostly because it felt like neutral territory, a place where their being together didn't draw quite as many stares or whispered comments. The university bubble wasn't perfect, but it was better than most of the world outside. "Marcus," Lily said suddenly, closing her book and turning to face him fully. "I want to ask you something, but I'm afraid you're going to say no." Marcus set down his own book, giving her his full attention. "Ask me." "There's this concert coming up in December. December 6th. It's going to be huge, bigger than Woodstock maybe. The Rolling Stones are headlining, and it's free. Completely free." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He'd heard rumors about this concert, whispers in the clubs and record stores about Mick Jagger wanting to do something spectacular to end the decade. "Where?" "Altamont Speedway. It's about an hour from here. The Stones, Jefferson Airplane, Santana, the Grateful Dead." Marcus, it's going to be the concert of our lifetime. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through all the reasons this was a bad idea. Crowds that size were unpredictable. The Hells Angels were providing security, which meant trouble was practically guaranteed. And a young black man at a predominantly white rock festival was asking for the kind of attention he'd spent his whole life trying to avoid. "Lily," he began carefully, "I don't know if that's such a good idea." "I knew you'd say that." She turned away from him, frustration clear in the set of her shoulders. "You always say that when it comes to anything that might be fun or spontaneous or dangerous," Marcus finished quietly. "Lily, you don't understand what it's like for me at those kinds of events. I can't just blend into the crowd the way you can." "So what? You're just going to spend your whole life playing it safe? Never taking any risks? Never doing anything that might make people look at you sideways?" The words stung because they carried more than a grain of truth. Marcus had been playing it safe his entire life, carefully calculating the risks and benefits of every decision, every relationship, every moment of joy or rebellion. It was a survival strategy that had served him well, but it was also a prison of his own making. "It's not about playing it safe," he said. "It's about staying alive." Lily's expression softened, and she reached for his hand. "I'm sorry. I know it's more complicated for you than it is for me. I want to experience this with you. I want us to be part of something historic, something beautiful. And I want to see the Rolling Stones with the person I love." Marcus felt his resolve wavering. There was something in her voice, in the way she looked at him, that made him want to be braver than he was. Lily ... "I'll make you a deal," she said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with inspiration. "You come to Altamont with me, and I'll go with you to see the Temptations when they come to the Fillmore in February. Front row seats, the whole experience. I'll even let you dress me up all classy for the occasion." Marcus couldn't help but smile at that image. Lily in pearls and a proper dress, trying to fit in with the Motown crowd. "You'd really do that? Sit through a whole Temptations concert?" "I'd sit through a polka festival if it meant spending time with you," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made his heart do something complicated in his chest. "The Temptations aren't polka. You know what I mean." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just his girlfriend, but his partner, his co-conspirator in the grand adventure of trying to love each other in a world that didn't want them to. She was asking him to trust her, to trust them, to believe that their love was strong enough to survive whatever the world might throw at them. "What about James and Sarah?" he asked, already knowing he was going to say yes. "Already asked. Sarah's in, obviously. James said he'd go if you went." Lily's smile was triumphant, like she knew she'd already won. "One condition," Marcus said. "Name it." "We stick together the whole time, all four of us. No wandering off, no getting separated in the crowd. We go as a group. We stay as a group. We leave as a group." "Deal," Lily said immediately, then threw her arms around his neck and kissed him right there on the library steps. in full view of anyone who cared to look. When they broke apart, Marcus felt that familiar mixture of exhilaration and terror that seemed to accompany all of his major life decisions. "I can't believe I'm agreeing to this." "It's going to be amazing," Lily said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Historic. We'll be able to tell our grandchildren we were there." "Grandchildren?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused by her assumption of their shared future. "Well, somebody's grandchildren," Lily said, blushing slightly, but not backing down. Marcus pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the promise of adventures yet to come. "All right, Sanders, you've got yourself a deal. But if we get arrested or trampled or worse, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough," she said, then kissed him again for good measure. As they packed up their books and prepared to head back into the world, Marcus felt a flutter of something that might have been premonition, or might have just been pre-concert jitters. Either way, he pushed it down and focused on Lily's excitement. On the way, she was already planning what they should bring, what they should wear, how early they should arrive. He had no way of knowing that he'd just agreed to attend the last concert of his life, or that the decision they'd just made on the Berkeley Library steps would set in motion a chain of events that would end with his blood soaking into the dusty ground of Altamont Speedway. All he knew was that he loved her, and that sometimes love meant saying yes, even when every instinct told you to run in the opposite direction. Chapter 10. Midnight at the Lake. Briones Regional Park, 11:30 p.m. October 1969. The payphone outside the 7-Eleven rang 3 times before Marcus answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello." "Marcus, it's me." Lily's voice was tight, controlled, but he could hear something underneath. Hurt, anger, desperation. "Lily?" "What time is it? Where are you?" "I need to see you. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Now? Please?" Marcus sat up in bed, instantly awake. In the background he could hear traffic, the distant sound of voices, the ambient noise of a world that didn't sleep. "What happened?" "I'll tell you when I see you." "Do you know the lake up in Briones Park?" "Yeah, but Lily, that's..." "Please, Marcus. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." There was something in her voice that made his chest tighten with concern. This wasn't the confident, curious girl he'd been getting to know. This was someone who sounded lost, maybe even scared. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "Thank you." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone in the dim light of his bedroom. Outside, Oakland was settling into its midnight rhythm. Sirens in the distance, the occasional car passing on the street below. The urban lullaby he'd grown up with. But tonight, it all sounded different, charged with urgency and possibility. He dressed quickly, grabbing his jacket and keys, while trying not to wake Karen, whose bedroom shared a wall with his. The Nova started on the 3rd try, its engine turning over with the reluctant reliability of a car that had seen better years, but wasn't ready to give up yet. The drive to Briones took him through neighborhoods, that shifted like chapters in a book. From the working-class streets of Oakland through the industrial corridor of Richmond, then up into the hills where Berkeley's wealth spread out in carefully manicured isolation. The park itself was closed after dark, but Marcus knew the back roads, the places where teenagers had been sneaking in for decades to drink beer and watch the stars. He found a car parked near the trailhead that led to the lake, a Volkswagen looking small and vulnerable under the mercury vapor lights that cast everything in harsh blue-white relief. She was sitting on the hood, wrapped in a denim jacket he'd never seen before, staring out at the darkness beyond the parking lot. When she heard his car approach, she looked up, and even in the strange light, he could see that she'd been crying. There was something else, too, a red mark on her left cheek that made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Jesus, Lily," he said, getting out of the car and walking quickly toward her. "What happened to your face?" She touched her cheek self-consciously. "Family dinner got a little heated." "Someone hit you?" "My father." She said it matter-of-factly, but Marcus could hear the hurt underneath. "Jake saw us together last week and decided tonight was a good time to share that information." Marcus felt something cold and dangerous settle in his stomach. He'd known this moment would come eventually. The confrontation, the forcing of choices, the revelation that their careful bubble of privacy had been penetrated by a world that had very strong opinions about black boys and white girls. "Are you okay?" he asked, reaching out to touch her face gently. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes for a moment. "I am now." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch, and the shared understanding that something fundamental had changed between them and the world. When she opened her eyes, Marcus saw something new there. Not just hurt, but determination. "I left," she said, packed my stuff and walked out. "Where are you staying?" "I don't know yet. Sarah said I could crash at her place for a few days while I figure things out." She looked at him directly, her blue eyes serious in the artificial light. "I chose you, Marcus. I chose us." The weight of her decision settled between them like gravity. Marcus understood what she'd given up: family, security, the comfortable certainty of a world that had been laid out for her since birth. She'd thrown it all away for him, for them, for the possibility of something real in a world full of artificial barriers. "Lily," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Because the alternative was living a lie, pretending that what I feel for you is something I should be ashamed of." She slid off the hood of her car and took his hands in hers. "I'm scared," she continued. "I'm 17 years old. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I just burned every bridge I had to my old life. But I'm not sorry, because the only thing that scares me more than not knowing what comes next is the idea of never finding out." Marcus pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as she buried her face against his chest. He could feel her trembling, from cold, from emotion, from the adrenaline of having made an irreversible choice. "We'll figure it out," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together." They held each other in the empty parking lot. Two teenagers who just decided to bet everything on love and hope it was enough to carry them through whatever the world might throw at them. "Come on," Marcus said finally. "Let's go see that lake." They walked the trail by moonlight, their footsteps soft on the packed earth, their voices low in deference to the sleeping park around them. The lake stretched out before them like a mirror, reflecting stars and clouds in perfect stillness. They found a spot on the shore where someone had built a fire ring from gathered stones. The ashes long cold, but the circle still holding the memory of warmth. Lily spread a blanket from her car, while Marcus gathered wood for a fire. Soon they had flames dancing between them and the darkness, casting shifting shadows and painting their faces in warm orange light. "Tell me about your mother," Marcus said, as they settled beside each other, close enough to feel each other's warmth. Lily was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was soft, thoughtful. "She was the best person I ever knew. Kind without being naive, strong without being hard. She saw the best in everyone, even my father." Lily smiled sadly. "Especially my father." She could see the man he'd been before the job made him suspicious of everything. Before the world convinced him that being gentle was the same as being weak. "What would she think about us?" "She'd love you," Lily said without hesitation. "She'd love your music, your gentleness, the way you make me think about things differently. And she'd be furious with my father for hitting me." Marcus reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have invited you to dinner every Sunday," Lily said, her voice carrying both warmth and loss. "She would have asked you about your music, your dreams, what books you were reading. She had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the star-filled sky. Marcus watched the light play across Lily's face, illuminating the red mark on her cheek that was already beginning to fade. He felt a surge of protective anger toward her father, but underneath that was something deeper, a recognition that this moment, this choice she'd made, had brought them to a new level of commitment. "What are we doing, Marcus?" she asked suddenly. "I mean, really? We're 17 years old, and we're acting like we can take on the world." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance. "Maybe that's exactly what we're doing," he said finally. "Maybe being 17 is the only time you're brave enough to believe that love can actually change things. And if we're wrong, then we'll be wrong together." He turned to face her fully. "But I don't think we are wrong. I think what we have is real, and I think it's worth fighting for." Lily studied his face in the firelight, searching for something. Doubt, perhaps, or the kind of casual certainty that would make his words easy to dismiss. Instead, she found only the steady conviction that had drawn her to him from that first day in the record store. "I've never felt this way about anyone," she said quietly. "It scares me sometimes how much I love you." Love? The word hung between them like a bridge they'd been approaching for weeks, without quite having the courage to cross. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Marcus Johnson. I love your music and your kindness and the way you see the world. I love how you make me feel like I'm becoming who I'm supposed to be." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a door opening onto a landscape he'd never quite dared to explore. "I love you too," he said, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. "God, Lily, I love you so much. It keeps me awake at night." They moved toward each other as if magnetized, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of smoke and starlight, and promises they were too young to fully understand, but too in love to question. When they broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "We should be careful," Marcus said, though his hands were already finding the buttons of her shirt. "I know," she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "But I don't want to be careful tonight. Tonight, I want to forget about the world outside this place." They made love on the blanket beside the fire, their bodies moving together with a tenderness that spoke of more than just desire. This was about claiming each other, about creating something that belonged only to them, in a world that seemed determined to keep them apart. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching the fire burn down to embers. The night air was cool against their skin, but they had each other's warmth, and that seemed like enough to hold back any darkness. "What happens now?" Lily asked, her head resting on Marcus's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Now we figure out how to build a life together," Marcus said, stroking her hair. "It won't be easy. There'll be people who don't understand, who think we're wrong for being together." "Let them think what they want," Lily said fiercely. "They don't know us. They don't know what we have." Marcus smiled in the darkness. "No, they don't. And maybe that's their loss." They talked until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, planning dreams that seemed as vast as the lake before them. Marcus spoke of his music, of wanting to write songs that could bridge the gaps between people, that could make someone driving home from work forget their troubles for 3 minutes and remember what it felt like to hope. Lily talked about her writing, about wanting to capture the truth of this moment, this feeling, this certainty that love could triumph over hatred if only enough people were willing to believe in it. "Promise me something," Lily said, as the sun painted the water gold and pink. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, we won't let them change us. We won't let them make us cynical or bitter or afraid to love this much." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I promise," he said, "no matter what comes, we'll remember this night, this feeling, this choice we made to love each other despite everything the world might throw at us." They sealed the promise with a kiss as the sun rose over the lake, painting everything in shades of hope and possibility. Neither of them could have known then how severely that promise would be tested, how much the world would demand of their love before the story was over. But in that moment, beside the still water, with the morning light beginning to chase away the shadows, they believed absolutely in their ability to keep faith with each other and with the dream they'd chosen to make real. The fire had burned down to cold ashes, but they carried its warmth inside them as they packed up their belongings and prepared to face whatever came next. Hand in hand, they walked back toward their cars and the world beyond the park, ready to begin the life they'd chosen together. Behind them, the lake reflected the morning sky, holding the memory of their promises in its still waters long after they'd driven away. Chapter 11. The Road to Altamont. The morning air carried the promise of something electric. Marcus loaded his duffel bag into the trunk of his beat-up Chevy, the metal warm under his palms despite the early hour. The car had seen better days. Rust bloomed along the wheel wells, and the paint had faded from midnight blue to something closer to grey. But the engine still purred when he turned the key, and that was all that mattered. Lily appeared at the corner, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, Marcus's denim jacket draped over her arm. Even in the pale dawn light, she seemed to glow with anticipation. Her hair caught the breeze as she walked toward him, and Marcus felt that familiar flutter in his chest, the one that still surprised him every time he saw her. "Ready for history?" he asked, taking her bag and tossing it into the trunk alongside his. She grinned, that mischievous spark dancing in her eyes. Ready for whatever comes. Sarah and James arrived minutes later, Sarah practically bouncing on her toes, while James maintained his usual cool demeanor, cigarette dangling from his lips. They piled into the back seat with a collection of snacks, warm beer, and enough nervous energy to power the car. "So, this is really happening," Sarah said, settling into her claimed spot behind Marcus. "We're actually going to see the stones." "We're going to see a lot more than that," James replied. But there was something in his voice that made Marcus glance at him in the rearview mirror, a wariness that sat heavy in his dark eyes. Marcus turned the key, and the Chevy rumbled to life. The radio crackled, settling into the familiar groove of a song that seemed perfect for the moment, all hope and California dreams. He rolled down the windows, letting the morning air flood the car. "Last chance to change your minds," he said, though he was already pulling away from the curb. "Not a chance in hell," Lily laughed, reaching over to squeeze his hand on the steering wheel. The highway opened up before them, like a promise. Other cars dotted the road, VW buses painted with flowers and peace signs, convertibles packed with long-haired kids, motorcycles rumbling past with riders who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Everyone seemed to be heading in the same direction, drawn by the same invisible force. Sarah hung her head out the window, her hair whipping in the wind as she tried to catch the attention of a carload of guys in the next lane. "This is like a pilgrimage," she shouted over the wind. "Like we're all going to Mecca or something." "Mecca doesn't usually involve the Hells Angels as security," James muttered. But his words were lost in the rush of air and engine noise. Marcus felt Lily's eyes on him and turned to catch her studying his profile. "What?" "Just watching you," she said. "You look different when you're driving. Relaxed." He was relaxed, he realized. For the first time in weeks, the weight he usually carried, the constant awareness of being watched, judged, measured, had lifted. Out here on the open road, windows down and music playing, he could almost believe they were just 4 kids heading to a concert. Nothing more complicated than that. They stopped at a roadside diner around noon, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter and the pie was sweet enough to make you forget your troubles. The parking lot was packed with cars bearing out-of-state plates and bumper stickers declaring peace and love. Inside, the air buzzed with excitement and the smell of bacon grease. Marcus and James grabbed a booth while the girls went to the bathroom to freshen up. The vinyl seats were cracked and patched with duct tape, but the waitress poured coffee without being asked and called them honey in a voice gravelled by years of cigarettes. "You sure about this?" James asked quietly, stirring sugar into his cup. "Sure about what?" "All of it, man. Taking her to Altamont, taking her anywhere." James's voice was low, serious. "My cousin went to a Stones show in Chicago last year. Said it was like a war zone, and that was with regular security." Marcus sipped his coffee, considering. He'd heard the stories too, about crowds that turned ugly, about violence that seemed to follow the Stones like a shadow. But he'd also seen the look in Lily's eyes when she talked about the concert, the way her whole face lit up with possibility. "She wants to go," he said finally. "That ain't what I asked." Before Marcus could respond, Lily and Sarah returned, sliding into the booth with a kind of energy that only came from shared secrets and bathroom mirror pep talks. "What are you two looking so serious about?" Lily asked, bumping Marcus's shoulder with hers. "Just discussing the finer points of rock and roll philosophy," Marcus said, forcing a smile. Sarah flagged down the waitress and ordered enough food for a small army. As they waited, other groups of concert-goers filtered in and out, their conversations creating a soundtrack of anticipation. Someone had a transistor radio tuned to a station that was providing updates on the festival. How many people were expected, which bands were confirmed, warnings about traffic and parking. "They're saying maybe 300,000 people," a guy at the next table was telling his friends. "Bigger than Woodstock." "Free concert, man," his buddy replied. "Course it's gonna be huge." Marcus caught Lily's eye across the table. She was practically vibrating with excitement, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup, in rhythm with some internal beat. He reached over and covered her hand with his, feeling the energy thrumming just beneath her skin. "You ready for 300,000 of your closest friends?" he asked. "Are you kidding? This is going to be incredible, historic. We'll be able to tell our kids we were there." The casual mention of their future together, kids, a shared story to tell, sent a warmth through Marcus's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. He squeezed her hand, trying to hold on to this moment, this feeling of infinite possibility. Back on the road, the traffic began to thicken. What had been a steady stream of festival-bound cars became a slow-moving river. Then something approaching a parking lot. Marcus downshifted, the Chevy's engine grumbling its displeasure at the stop-and-go pace. The closer they got to Altamont, the more the atmosphere changed. The free-flowing energy of the morning gave way to something more intense. more desperate. Cars overheated on the shoulder. Groups of hitchhikers walked along the roadside, their cardboard signs reading Altamont or Bust and Take Me to the Stones. Look at all these people, Sarah breathed, pressed against the window. Where are they all going to go? Same place we are, I guess, Marcus said. But privately, he was beginning to wonder the same thing. The concert was supposed to be at a speedway, but surely there wasn't enough space for all these people. A motorcycle roared past them in the breakdown lane, its rider wearing a leather vest with patches that made James straighten in his seat. "Hell's Angels," he said quietly. "I thought they were just providing security," Lily said. "Yeah, well, their idea of security might be different from yours," James replied. They crept forward another few hundred yards before coming to a complete stop. Marcus turned off the engine to save gas, and sudden quiet settled over them. Without the engine noise and wind, they could hear the distant thump of music, the roar of thousands of voices, the occasional rev of a motorcycle engine. "We could walk from here," Sarah suggested. "It's got to be less than a mile." Marcus looked at the gridlock ahead of them, then at the groups of people abandoning their cars and setting off on foot. Might be our only option. They gathered their things, a cooler with sandwiches Sarah had packed, a blanket Lily had brought, Marcus's camera, and joined the stream of people walking toward the speedway. The December afternoon was warm, almost unseasonably so, and dust kicked up from hundreds of feet created a hazy cloud that hung in the air. As they walked, Marcus began to notice things that made his shoulders tense. The Hells Angels weren't just providing security. They were everywhere, revving their bikes, drinking from bottles of wine, eyeing the crowd with expressions that ranged from amusement to barely contained hostility. Some of the concert-goers gave them wide berths, while others seemed drawn to them like moths to a flame. "Stay close to me when we get there," he murmured to Lily. She looked up at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "Marcus, it's just a concert." But as they crested a small hill and saw the speedway spread out below them, Marcus knew it was going to be anything but just a concert. The crowd was massive, a sea of humanity that stretched as far as the eye could see. The stage looked impossibly small and distant, surrounded by a writhing mass of bodies. Even from here, they could see fights breaking out, people being pushed and shoved, the angels moving through the crowd like sharks. "Jesus," James breathed. "This is insane." Lily slipped a hand into Marcus's. Her earlier excitement, tempered by the reality, spread out before them. "Maybe we should stay toward the back," she said quietly. Marcus nodded, but he knew it might not matter. In a crowd this size, this chaotic, the back could become the front in a matter of minutes. Still, they pressed forward, carried along by the tide of bodies, all moving toward the same destination. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful in any other context. Here, with the dust and chaos, an underlying current of violence, it looked almost ominous, like the sky was bleeding. As they approached the outskirts of the main crowd, Marcus could feel the energy shifting, becoming something darker and more unpredictable. The music from the stage, he thought it might be Santana, pounded through the ground beneath their feet. But it was almost drowned out by the roar of voices, the sound of breaking glass, the occasional scream. "You sure about this?" he asked Lily one more time. She looked up at him, her face flushed with excitement and apprehension in equal measure. "We've come this far," she said. "Besides, we're together. What could go wrong?" Marcus wished he could share her optimism. Instead, he pulled her closer and stepped into the crowd, hoping against hope that they would all make it out of this day in one piece. Chapter 12. The Rot Sets In. The first thing that hit them was the smell, sweat and dust and something else, something sharp and metallic that Marcus couldn't quite place. As they pushed deeper into the crowd, bodies pressed against them from all sides, a living mass that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. The ground beneath their feet was trampled grass mixed with dirt, littered with beer cans, torn clothing, and things Marcus didn't want to identify. Santana was on stage, Carlos's guitar weaving its hypnotic spell over the crowd. Black Magic Woman drifted across the sea of heads, but the music felt fragmented, broken up by shouts and crashes and the constant rumble of motorcycles. Sarah tried to dance, swaying to the rhythm, but there was barely room to move, bodies packed so tight that breathing became an effort. "This is crazy," she shouted over the noise, but her earlier enthusiasm was already beginning to crack around the edges. Lily gripped Marcus's hand tighter as someone stumbled into her, reeking of wine and something stronger. The man's eyes were glassy, unfocused, pupils blown wide. He mumbled something incoherent and staggered away, leaving Marcus wondering what he'd taken and how many others were in similar states. "Stay close," Marcus said again, his voice barely audible over the din. He wrapped his arm around Lily's waist, creating a small pocket of space in the chaos. James did the same with Sarah, the four of them forming a tight knot as they tried to navigate through the crowd. Near the stage, Marcus could see the Hells Angels more clearly now. They sat on their motorcycles like kings surveying their domain, leather vests gleaming, pool cues and chains hanging from their belts. Some of them were laughing, passing bottles of wine back and forth. Others watched the crowd with predatory eyes, looking for trouble or waiting for it to find them. One angel, a massive man with a beard that reached his chest, grabbed a kid who'd gotten too close to his bike. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, all elbows and acne and tie-dyed innocence. The angel shook him like a rag doll before shoving him back into the crowd, where he disappeared among the bodies. "Did you see that?" Lily asked, her voice tight with concern. Marcus had seen it, and he'd seen the way no one intervened, the way the crowd just absorbed the violence and kept moving. It reminded him of something his father used to say: "When wolves are hunting, the sheep just try to stay invisible." They found a spot about halfway back from the stage, far enough to avoid the worst of the crush, but close enough to see the performers. Marcus spread out their blanket, creating a small island of stability in the chaos. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Four friends at a concert, sharing sandwiches and passing around a warm beer. But the normalcy was an illusion. Even as they tried to settle in, the crowd kept shifting around them, waves of bodies moving forward and back with no apparent logic. Someone stepped on their blanket, kicked over their cooler, stumbled and fell across Lily's legs. Each incident was minor, forgettable, but they added up to a sense of constant unease. "The vibe here is all wrong," James said quietly, leaning close so only Marcus could hear. "This ain't like the festivals you read about. This is something else." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. He'd been to plenty of concerts, had felt the energy when thousands of people came together to hear music. This was different. The energy here was jagged, unpredictable, like electricity looking for a place to ground itself. A fight broke out about 50 yards to their left. Just a brief scuffle, two guys shoving each other before their friends pulled them apart. But it was enough to send ripples through the surrounding crowd, people pushing to get away from the disturbance, others craning their necks to see what was happening. "Maybe we should move further back," Lily suggested. But even as she said it, Marcus could see it was too late. They were locked in now, part of the organism whether they wanted to be or not. On stage, Santana finished their set to thunderous applause. The brief pause between acts created a strange vacuum, the crowd's energy with nowhere to go. People began pushing forward, trying to get closer to the stage, and the density around them increased noticeably. A woman stumbled past them, laughing hysterically at something only she could see. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She spun in circles, arms outstretched, until someone grabbed her and pulled her away. "What did she take?" Sarah whispered. "Probably better not to know," James replied. The Hells Angels were more active now, revving their engines and riding through the crowd in patterns that seemed designed to intimidate rather than provide security. Marcus watched one angel deliberately ride close to a group of hippies, forcing them to scatter. The biker laughed as they dove out of the way, clearly enjoying their fear. Another angel was arguing with a young black man near the stage. Marcus couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the tension in both men's postures, the way the crowd around them was backing away, sensing trouble. The argument escalated quickly, raised voices, jabbing fingers, and then the angel's pool cue was in his hand. The young man backed down, hands raised in surrender, but the angel wasn't finished. He shoved him hard, sending him stumbling backward into the crowd. The man disappeared among the bodies, but Marcus could see the angel scanning the crowd, looking for his next target. "We need to be careful," Marcus said to his friends. "These guys aren't playing around." As if summoned by his words, one of the angels noticed their group. He was younger than some of the others, with greasy hair and crude tattoos covering his arms. His eyes fixed on them with particular interest, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He recognized that look, the same one he'd seen from cops when they thought he was in the wrong neighborhood, from store clerks who followed him down aisles, from anyone who'd already decided what kind of person he was based on the color of his skin. The angel started walking toward them, weaving between the packed bodies with practiced ease. Marcus felt Lily tense beside him, felt James shift slightly to his left, ready for whatever was coming. Well, Well, the angel said as he reached them, his voice carrying despite the noise around them. What do we have here? He looked directly at Marcus, then let his gaze slide over to Lily, taking in her blonde hair, her white skin, the way she was pressed close to Marcus's side. His smile was ugly, full of implications. You kids lost? He asked, but it wasn't really a question. We're just here for the music, Marcus said evenly, keeping his voice calm and respectful. He'd learned long ago that the key to these situations was to appear non-threatening while never backing down completely. The angel chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. Music, huh? You sure about that, boy? The word hit Marcus like a slap, but he kept his expression neutral. Beside him, he felt Lily stiffen with anger, and he squeezed her hand in warning. This wasn't the time or place for righteous indignation. We're sure, Marcus said. The angel studied them for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the way Marcus and Lily's hands were intertwined. Then he spat in the dirt near Marcus's feet and walked away, but not before making it clear that he'd remember them. Jesus, Sarah breathed once he was gone. What was that about? Marcus didn't answer, but he knew. It was about the same thing it was always about. Who belonged where, who had the right to be with whom, and who got to make those decisions. It was about the invisible lines that crisscrossed the world, lines that he and Lily crossed every time they were together. The Jefferson airplane took the stage as the sun began to set, and for a moment the crowd's attention shifted away from its internal tensions. Grace Slick's voice soared over the speedway, ethereal and powerful, singing about white rabbits and pills that made you larger. The song should have been transcendent, a perfect soundtrack for the chemical dreams of a generation. Instead, it felt ominous, like a warning nobody was heeding. During White Rabbit, another fight broke out, closer this time. Marcus could see it clearly. Two men grappling over something, maybe a girl, maybe drugs, maybe nothing at all. The Hells Angels moved in quickly, but instead of breaking it up, they seemed to be enjoying it, cheering on the violence like spectators at a gladiator match. One of the fighters went down hard, his head hitting the ground with a sound Marcus could hear even over the music. The man didn't get back up. The angels laughed and moved on, leaving him lying there as the crowd flowed around his motionless body, like water around a stone. Did you see that? Lily whispered, her face pale in the stage lights. Shouldn't someone help him? But there was no one to help. No police, no medical personnel that Marcus could see. Just the angels, who seemed more interested in causing problems than solving them, and a crowd that was too stoned, too scared, or too caught up in the music to care. As the airplane finished their set, Marcus made a decision. They needed to get out of here, needed to leave before whatever was building reached its inevitable conclusion. But when he looked around, he realized they were trapped. The crowd had grown even denser during the performance, bodies packed so tight that movement in any direction was nearly impossible. The stage went dark for a moment, and in the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear things that made his skin crawl. Crying, shouting, the wet sound of someone being sick. When the lights came back up, the Grateful Dead were setting up their equipment, but something had changed in the crowd's energy. The earlier excitement had curdled into something uglier, more desperate. "How much longer?" Lily asked, and Marcus could hear the strain in her voice. "The stones are supposed to go on last," he said. "Could be hours." Hours. Marcus looked around at the deteriorating situation, at the angels who were growing more aggressive by the minute, at the crowd that seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Hours felt like an eternity. The Dead launched into their first song, Jerry Garcia's guitar providing a momentary respite from the tension. But even their mellow grooves couldn't calm the beast that Altamont was becoming. If anything, the music seemed to agitate the crowd further, like a soundtrack to chaos. Marcus pulled Lily closer, feeling her heart beating against his chest. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. But as he looked out over the sea of faces, twisted with chemical euphoria and barely contained violence, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all witnesses to something ending, not just a concert, but an entire dream of peace and love that was rotting from the inside out. The worst was yet to come. Chapter 13. Sympathy for the Devil. Night fell like a curtain dropping, and with it came a darkness that had nothing to do with the absence of sun. The stage lights blazed against the black sky, creating harsh shadows that danced across thousands of faces. The dust glowed in the fading light. The temperature cooled, but the energy sharpened, like the air before a storm. The stage stood in silhouette, lit from behind. Thousands pressed forward, shoulder to shoulder. The crowd hummed with restless anticipation, the sound of tens of thousands of voices blending into a single rumble. A ripple pushed forward, then another. People jostled hard. A man shoved past Marcus, eyes glassy, muttering nonsense. Two men started yelling, fists nearly swinging before the sea of bodies forced them apart. Lily clung to Marcus's arm, tense now, her earlier euphoria fading. Marcus glanced at James, who had his arm locked protectively around Sarah. "We're too deep in it now," James said grimly. Marcus nodded slightly, scanning the chaos around them. Down front, the Hell's Angels prowled like wolves. Their bottles were half empty. Their grips on pool cues were tighter now, their faces cold, watchful. One biker yelled at a kid climbing a speaker. He yanked him down by his shirt collar and shoved him into the dust. The kid stumbled away, dazed, blood on his lip. The angels laughed. Suddenly, cheers, screams. The Rolling Stones emerged, stepping onto the stage. Mick Jagger, shirt unbuttoned, strutted up to the mic. His voice cut through the din. "Easy now. Cool it down, yeah. We're all here for the same thing." But the crowd was beyond cooling down. If anything, Mick's presence seemed to inflame them further. The pushing intensified. Marcus wrapped both arms around Lily, creating a pocket of space in the crush. "Stay with me," he said, low and steady. She nodded, gripping him like a lifeline. The first chords of Sympathy for the Devil slashed out. Raw, hypnotic, absolutely relentless. Mick's voice was a purr, seductive and dangerous, as he began to weave his spell over the crowd. He moved like a predator across the stage, hips swaying, lips curved in a smile that promised everything and delivered chaos. The crowd screamed, bodies pressed tighter. People yelled, some laughing hysterically, others panicked. Sarah's voice was high, nervous. "I can't even move." James held her firm, scanning the crowd. Don't! Mick Jagger prowled the stage like a predator, feeding on the frenzy. Down front, two angels slammed into a man trying to climb closer. He disappeared under their boots. Lily saw it, her face twisted. Marcus, she whispered. He pulled her closer, shielding her with his body. The song built, faster, louder. A bottle smashed near James's feet. An angel swung a pool cue at a man's ribs. A girl stumbled, screaming for help, swallowed by the crowd. Mick kept singing, unfazed or unwilling to stop. Marcus's jaw tightened. He leaned down to Lily. We stick together, no matter what, he said, low and firm. She nodded against his chest, fear overtaking the wonder. The dream was shattering, and the night had only just begun. The song shifted suddenly. Under My Thumb kicked in, sharp and jagged. The crowd surged again, forward toward the stage. The crush was unbearable now. Marcus gripped Lily's waist, holding her tight against him as bodies slammed from all sides. Sarah yelped, nearly pulled under. James yanked her back, shoving away a stoned man stumbling into them. Ahead, a commotion. A young black man, barely older than Marcus, argued with an angel. The biker shoved him, hard. The kid stumbled back, dazed, lifted his hands. The angel grinned and punched him square in the face. The kid crumpled. Two more angels joined in, kicking him savagely. Lily gasped. Marcus, she said, panicked. Marcus pulled her back, shielding her view. But his eyes burned. His chest heaved. What the hell's he doing here? One angel shouted, pointing his pool cue toward Marcus. Ain't this a white show? Ain't your kind got your own music? A few nearby heads turned. A couple of drunk festival goers snickered nervously. Marcus kept his hands open, calm, voice steady. I don't want trouble, man. The angel stepped closer, breath thick with beer. What's that, boy? You slumming it out here for the white girl? He looked over at Lily, leering. Yeah, I see. Ain't enough girls where you from? Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't move. I said, I don't want trouble. The angel jabbed the pool cue into Marcus's chest, hard. Then get your black ass out of here. Lily stepped forward, furious. Leave him alone. The angel laughed. Oh, you like that? You want him that bad, sweetheart? Marcus shifted slightly, instinctive, protective. Back off, man. The angel tilted his head, grinning wider. Or what? You gonna sing me a Motown song, boy? He spat in the dirt at Marcus's feet. You don't belong here. Marcus exhaled, controlled, calm. We're leaving. Marcus turned slightly, pulling Lily with him. Nah, the angel said. The blade flashed. Chapter 14. Blood in the Dust. The angel reached them just as the song shifted, the hypnotic groove of sympathy for the devil, giving way to the harder, more aggressive opening of Under My Thumb. The change in rhythm seemed to trigger something in the crowd, a new surge of violence that rippled outward from the stage like shockwaves. Marcus found himself face to face with the massive biker, close enough to smell the wine on his breath and see the crude tattoos that covered his thick arms. The man was older than Marcus had first thought, maybe in his 30s, with dead eyes and a smile that belonged in nightmares. "Well, well," the angel said, his voice carrying despite the thunderous music. "Look what we got here." Marcus kept his hands visible, his stance non-threatening but ready. Years of living as a black man in America had taught him to read these situations, to calculate odds and exits, and the precise moment when talking stopped being an option. "We don't want any trouble," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. The angel's grin widened, showing teeth stained brown with tobacco. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" He gestured toward Lily with his pool cue. "Just wondering what a pretty white girl like this is doing with someone like you." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. Behind the angel, he could see other bikers gathering, forming a loose circle. The crowd around them sensed the coming violence and began to pull back, creating a pocket of space in the crush of bodies. "She's with me," Marcus said simply. "Is that right?" The angel's eyes never left Marcus's face, but his pool cue drifted closer to Lily. "That what you want, sweetheart? You want to be with this boy?" Lily stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "His name is Marcus, and yes, I'm with him." The angel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Marcus, that's a fancy name for a—" "Don't." The word came out harder than Marcus intended, and he saw the angel's expression shift, become more focused, more dangerous. "Don't what, boy?" There it was again, that word, delivered like a slap. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists despite himself, felt the familiar fire building in his chest. But he also felt Lily's hand slip into his, felt the tremor in her fingers, and forced himself to stay calm. "My name is Marcus," he said quietly, "and we're just here for the music." On stage, Mick Jagger prowled like a caged animal, his voice cutting through the chaos as he sang about control and power and keeping someone under his thumb. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Here he was, trying to maintain his dignity while surrounded by men who saw him as less than human. "The music," the angel repeated, as if testing the words. "What kind of music you like, Marcus?" He drew the name out, making it sound like a mockery. "All kinds," Marcus said. "All kinds. That include white music, or you just stick to your own?" The question was a trap, and Marcus knew it. Whatever he answered would be wrong, would give the angel an excuse for what he was already planning to do. "Music is music," Marcus said. The angel nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly swung his pool cue in a vicious arc. Marcus jerked backward, the wooden shaft missing his face by inches. The crowd around them gasped and pressed back further, creating more space for the violence they all knew was coming. "Funny thing about music," the angel said conversationally, as if he hadn't just tried to cave in Marcus's skull. "Some folks think they can just listen to anything they want, go anywhere they want, be with anyone they want." His eyes flicked to Lily again. "But that ain't how the world works, is it?" James stepped forward, his face tight with anger. Hey man, just leave them alone. The angel's attention shifted to him, and Marcus saw the predatory gleam in the biker's eyes intensify. You got something to say, boy? I said, leave them alone. The angel grinned and gestured to his brothers. Two of them moved to flank James, their intentions clear. Sarah grabbed James's arm, trying to pull him back, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded now, trapped in a circle of leather and chains and barely contained violence. You boys stick together, don't you? The angel said. That's touching. Real touching. He spat in the dirt at Marcus's feet. But this here's a white show, and you don't belong. Says who? Lily's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She stepped forward, putting herself between Marcus and the angel, her whole body vibrating with fury. Who made you the judge of who belongs where? The angel's smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something uglier. You got a mouth on you, don't you, sweetheart? Don't call me sweetheart. I'll call you whatever I want. The angel reached out with his free hand, as if to touch her face. Marcus moved without thinking, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He grabbed the angel's wrist, stopping the hand inches from Lily's cheek. The silence that followed was deafening, even with the stones thundering in the background. The angel stared down at Marcus's hand on his wrist, his face slowly turning red with rage. You just made a big mistake, boy. Marcus released the biker's wrist, but didn't step back. Don't touch her. Or what? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with years of history and hatred. Marcus knew there was no good answer, no way to back down without losing everything that mattered to him. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he'd been walking toward this moment his whole life, every slight and insult and casual act of cruelty leading him here, to this dusty field, to this choice between dignity and survival. Just don't, Marcus said quietly. The angel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see. You think you're some kind of tough guy, don't you? Think because you got yourself a white girl, you're equal to us. I think I'm a human being, Marcus said. Human being. The angel rolled the words around like they tasted bad. That's funny. That's real funny. He looked around at his brothers, who were grinning and nodding in agreement. You hear that, boys? He thinks he's a human being. The laughter that followed was cold and cruel, designed to strip away whatever dignity Marcus had left. But instead of breaking him, it seemed to straighten his spine, lift his chin higher. I am, he said simply. The angel's face went from red to purple. You are what? A human being, just like you. Like me. The angel's voice rose to a roar that somehow carried over the music. Like me. The pool cue came down fast, aimed at Marcus's head, but Marcus had been expecting it, had seen it in the angel's eyes a split second before it happened. He ducked and rolled to the side, the wooden shaft whistling through the space where his skull had been. The crowd screamed, some in terror, some in excitement. On stage, the music pounded on, indifferent to the violence playing out below. Marcus came up in a crouch, his hands raised defensively. The angel was already swinging again, this time in a horizontal arc designed to catch him in the ribs. Marcus tried to jump back, but there were too many bodies behind him. Nowhere to go. The cue caught him across the chest, driving the air from his lungs and sending him stumbling backward. Pain exploded across his ribs, but he managed to stay on his feet. Marcus! Lily's scream cut through everything else, sharp and desperate. The angel was advancing now, pool cue raised like a club, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been pleasure. Behind him, his brothers were closing in, cutting off any possibility of escape. "You want to be treated like a human being?" the angel snarled. "Let me show you what we do to your kind of human being." The cue came down again, and this time Marcus couldn't dodge completely. It caught him on the shoulder, sending him to his knees in the dirt. The angel drew back for another blow, and Marcus saw his death written in the man's eyes. Then something glinted in the harsh stage lights, something metallic and deadly. A knife had appeared in the angel's other hand, its blade worn smooth from use. The pool cue had just been the opening act. "No!" Lily threw herself forward, trying to get between them, but James caught her and pulled her back. "Stay back!" Marcus shouted, even as he struggled to regain his feet. "All of you, stay back!" But the angel wasn't interested in the others anymore. His entire focus was on Marcus, on the young black man who dared to touch him, who dared to claim equality, who dared to love a white woman in a world that said he had no right to love anyone. "This is what happens," the angel said, his voice suddenly calm, conversational, "when you forget your place." The knife came down in a silver arc, catching Marcus just below the ribs. The blade slid between bone and muscle with sickening ease, finding the soft places where a man could be killed. Marcus gasped, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. He looked down at the handle protruding from his stomach, at the dark stain already spreading across his shirt, and for a moment couldn't quite process what he was seeing. The angel twisted the blade and pulled it free, then drove it home again, higher this time, seeking the heart. Marcus's knees buckled, and he fell forward, his hands pressed against the wounds that were pouring his life into the dirt. "Marcus!" Lily's scream tore through the night, raw and desperate, and full of a grief that would never fully heal. She broke free from James's grip and threw herself down beside Marcus, her hands covering his, trying to stop the bleeding that couldn't be stopped. Her white dress turned crimson as she pulled him into her lap, cradling his head against her chest. "Stay with me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, baby, stay with me." Marcus looked up at her, his vision already going grey around the edges. Blood bubbled on his lips when he tried to speak, but he forced the words out anyway. I wanted to write you that song," he whispered. "You will," she said desperately. "You will, I promise. Just stay awake, Marcus. Please stay awake." But Marcus was already fading, the light in his eyes dimming like a candle in the wind. His hand found hers, squeezed it once with whatever strength he had left. "You're my song, Lil," he breathed. "You always were." His hand went slack in hers. His chest rose once, twice, then was still. Lily's scream echoed across the speedway, raw and primal and heartbroken. She held him close, rocking back and forth, her tears falling onto his still face. Around them, the crowd pressed close, some horrified, some excited by the blood, all of them helpless witnesses to a tragedy that had been written long before any of them were born. The Hells Angels melted back into the crowd, their work done, leaving behind only the aftermath of their violence. On stage, the Rolling Stones played on, their music providing a surreal soundtrack to the scene of devastation. Mick Jagger's voice soared over the chaos, singing about satisfaction and Paint It Black, and the brutal realities of a world that had no place for love, that crossed the lines of race and class. In Lily's arms, Marcus Johnson was still at last, his dreams silenced, his song unfinished. The flower child and the soul man, brought together by music and torn apart by hate, had become just another casualty in America's longest war, the war against itself. The music played on, but for Lily, the world had gone silent except for the sound of her own breaking heart. Chapter 15. Aftermath. The world fractured into fragments after that, shards of memory that cut deep whenever Lily tried to piece them together. The ambulance that came too late, its red lights painting the speedway in hellish hues. The paramedics who pronounced Marcus dead at the scene, their voices clinical and detached. The police who asked their questions with the weary resignation of men who'd seen too much violence to be surprised by more. James and Sarah had to physically carry Lily away from Marcus's body. She fought them, clawing and screaming, desperate to stay with him, as if her presence alone could somehow call him back. But death was absolute, and no amount of love could bridge that final divide. The ride home passed in a blur of headlights and tears. Sarah drove Marcus's Chevy, while James sat in the back with Lily, holding her as she shook with grief, so profound it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her bones. The radio played softly, some late-night DJ spinning mellow songs that felt like mockeries of everything they'd just witnessed. By morning, the news crews had descended on Altamont like vultures. The headlines screamed about violence and death at the free concert, but the stories that emerged bore little resemblance to what Lily had witnessed. Marcus became an unidentified young black male who had been armed and aggressive when he was killed by Hell's Angels acting in self-defense. The lie was so complete, so thoroughly constructed, that Lily wondered if she'd imagined the truth. But she could still feel Marcus's blood on her hands, could still hear his final words echoing in her mind. She knew what she'd seen, even if the world refused to believe it. She tried to tell his story, called newspapers, contacted civil rights organizations, stood on street corners with handmade signs demanding justice. But Marcus Johnson was just another casualty in a war most people preferred not to acknowledge. His death was filed away as justified, another dangerous black man eliminated for the safety of society. The funeral was held on a grey December morning at a small Baptist church in Oakland. Lily stood at the back, dressed in black, feeling like an intruder in her grief. Marcus's family filled the front pews. His mother, his sister Karen, aunts and uncles and cousins who'd known him all his life. They sang hymns in voices rich with sorrow, their music a counterpoint to the rage that burned in Lily's chest. Mrs. Johnson never looked at her directly, but Lily could feel the woman's pain like a physical weight. She wondered if Marcus's mother blamed her for what had happened, if she believed that her son would still be alive if he'd never fallen in love with a white girl. The terrible thing was, Lily wasn't sure she'd be wrong. When it came time to lower the casket, Lily stepped forward and placed something on the fresh earth. The guitar pick Marcus had given her that first day in the record store, when they traded albums and started down the path that led to this moment. She whispered the words she'd never gotten to say. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. The wind carried her words away, but the weight of them remained, settling into her chest where they would live forever. In the days that followed, Lily felt herself becoming a ghost. She moved through her father's house like a spectre, eating little, sleeping less, existing in a twilight world between the living and the dead. Tom Sanders watched her with something that might have been regret, but the words of apology never came. Jake avoided her entirely, perhaps finally understanding that his casual cruelty had consequences. The record store where she and Marcus had met became a place of pilgrimage. She would go there in the afternoons, standing in the same spot where they'd first talked about music and meaning. The owner, an aging hippie named Dave, let her stay as long as she wanted, understanding grief in the way that only someone who'd lost too much could understand. She bought the albums they'd shared, Cloud 9 and Let It Bleed, and played them until the grooves wore smooth. But the music had changed. Where once she'd heard joy and rebellion and the promise of a better world, now she heard only echoes of what had been lost. James came to see her one evening, 3 weeks after the funeral. He looked older somehow, harder, as if something soft in him had crystallized into steel. He sat on her bed while she stared out the window at the darkening sky. I joined the Panthers, he said, without preamble. Lily turned to look at him. What? The Black Panthers. Got my first meeting tomorrow night. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Figured it was time to stop singing about change and start making it happen. She understood. The world had shown them what it thought of peaceful coexistence, of love conquering hate, of the dream of integration. Maybe it was time for a different approach. Marcus wouldn't have wanted this, she said quietly. James's smile was bitter. Marcus is dead, Lil. What he wanted don't matter anymore. He was right, and they both knew it. The boy who'd believed in the power of music to bridge divides was gone, killed by the very hatred he'd tried to overcome. What remained was the harsh reality of a world that sorted people into categories and punished those who dared to cross the lines. What about you? James asked. What are you going to do? Lily didn't answer immediately. She'd been asking herself the same question for weeks, ever since she'd washed Marcus's blood from her hands and tried to figure out how to keep living in a world that had killed the only person who truly understood her. I'm leaving, she said finally. Leaving where? Here, all of it. I can't stay in a place where he died for loving me. James nodded slowly. Where will you go? I don't know. Somewhere no one knows my name or his. Somewhere I can try to figure out how to live with this. They sat in silence for a while, two survivors of a war they'd never asked to fight. Outside, the first stars were appearing, tiny points of light in a vast darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. You think things will ever change? Lily asked. James was quiet for a long time before answering. Yeah, he said finally, but not the way we thought they would. Not with songs and peace signs and holding hands. Change is gonna come through fire and blood and people like me who ain't willing to turn the other cheek anymore. He stood to leave, pausing at the door to look back at her. For what it's worth, he said, Marcus loved you. Really loved you. Don't let them take that away from you, no matter where you go or what you do. That love was real, and it was beautiful, and it was worth something, even if the world couldn't see it. After he left, Lily sat alone in her room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life she was preparing to abandon. Marcus's denim jacket hung on her chair, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. Her notebook of poems lay open to the page she'd read to him under the oak tree, the words now seeming prophetic in their sadness. She picked up her pen and began to write. They killed you for loving me, and they called it justice. They painted you as the aggressor, made your tenderness into violence, your love into a crime. But I remember the truth. Your hands gentle on my face, your voice soft in the darkness, your dreams bigger than the hatred that brought you down. I will carry you with me to whatever place I find beyond this wasteland of broken promises. Your song lives in me now, unfinished but not forgotten. She closed the notebook and stood, moving to her window to look out at the street where she'd grown up. Tomorrow, she would pack her things. The day after that, she would board a bus bound for somewhere else, anywhere else. She would leave behind everything she'd known and try to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. But she would carry Marcus with her, his memory, his love, the promise of the song he'd never finished writing. In a world that had tried to erase him, she would be his witness, his testament, his living proof that love had existed here, however briefly, however doomed. The stars grew brighter as the night deepened, and somewhere in their light, Lily thought she could hear the faint echo of a guitar, playing a melody that spoke of loss and longing, and the courage to keep believing in beauty, even after it had been destroyed. She pressed her hand against the window, feeling the cold glass beneath her palm, and whispered into the darkness, I'll remember everything. I promise. The night wind answered with a sound like distant music, carrying her words away into a world that was already forgetting the boy who died for love at Altamont Speedway. Chapter 16. A Change Gonna Come. The Greyhound station smelled of diesel fuel and broken dreams. Lily sat on a hard plastic chair, the suitcase at her feet, Marcus's denim jacket folded carefully in her lap. The ticket in her hand bore no specific destination. She'd asked for the first bus heading east, away from California, away from the ghosts that haunted every familiar street. Around her, other travelers waited with the patient resignation of people who'd learned that life was mostly about moving from one disappointment to another. A soldier in uniform dozed against his duffel bag. An elderly woman clutched a paper sack that smelled of fried chicken. A young mother bounced a crying baby, whispering soft reassurances that seemed more for herself than the child. Lily pulled out her notebook and read the letter she'd written, but would never send. Dear Marcus, it's been 2 months since Altamont, and I still wake up thinking I can hear your voice. The world has moved on, the way the world always does. The newspapers have found new tragedies to report, new outrages to dissect. Your death has become a footnote in the story of a concert gone wrong, a cautionary tale about the death of the 60s dream. But I refuse to let you become just a statistic. I refuse to let them erase what we had, what you were, what you meant. I'm leaving today. I can't stay in a place where every corner holds a memory of you, where every song on the radio sounds like a funeral dirge. I need to find somewhere I can breathe again, somewhere I can figure out how to live with this hole in my chest where my heart used to be. I know you'd probably tell me to stay and fight, to make them acknowledge the truth about what happened. But I'm not as brave as you were. I don't have your strength, your ability to stand tall in the face of hatred. All I have is this grief and these memories and the unfinished song you left behind. So I'm going to carry you with me instead, to whatever city I find, whatever life I build from the wreckage of this one. You'll be there in the books I read, the music I listened to, the poems I write in the small hours when sleep won't come. You'll be there in the way I treat strangers with kindness, the way I refuse to let cynicism win, the way I keep believing in love, even though love got you killed. They can paint you as a criminal, they can pretend your death was justified, but they can't take away what I know to be true. You were the best person I ever met, and loving you was the most honest thing I've ever done. I'll write our story someday when I'm strong enough. I'll make sure the world knows who Marcus Johnson really was. Not the lie they printed in the papers, but the truth. The boy who played guitar like he was channeling heaven, who treated every person he met with dignity, who believed music could heal the world's wounds. Until then, I'll carry you in my heart, where the angels can't reach you and the newspapers can't distort you, where you'll always be mine and I'll always be yours. All my love, always. Lily. She closed the notebook as her bus was called. Route 47 to Denver, with stops in Reno, Salt Lake City, and points between. She stood, shouldering her canvas bag, and walked toward the loading platform where the driver was checking tickets and directing passengers to their seats. The bus was half empty, which suited her fine. She chose a window seat near the back, away from the other travelers, and settled in for the long journey ahead. As the bus pulled out of the station, Lily pressed her face to the glass and watched San Francisco disappear behind them. The city looked different from this perspective, smaller somehow, less significant. The hills that had seemed so dramatic from street level were just gentle rises in the landscape. The bay that had sparkled like jewels from the heights of Pacific Heights was just another body of water, reflecting the pale winter sky. As they climbed into the mountains, leaving the bay area behind, Lily felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, it was far too soon for that, but a loosening of the grip that grief had maintained on her lungs. For the first time in weeks, she could take a full breath. The bus rolled through Nevada as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Lily watched the landscape change outside her window, from the green hills of California to the stark beauty of the high desert. Everything was vast out here, empty in a way that felt cleansing rather than lonely. Other passengers dozed or read paperback novels or stared out their own windows at the passing scenery. The soldier had struck up a conversation with the elderly woman who was traveling to visit her grandson in Colorado. The young mother had managed to get her baby to sleep and was now reading a magazine by the overhead light. These were ordinary people living ordinary lives, carrying their own small tragedies and quiet hopes. None of them knew about Marcus, about Altamont, about the boy who died for the crime of falling in love across the color line. To them, Lily was just another passenger, another anonymous face in the constantly shifting population of America's buses and trains and highways. There was comfort in that anonymity. For months, she'd felt like she was wearing her grief like a neon sign, broadcasting her loss to everyone she met. Now, surrounded by strangers who had no claim on her story, she could almost pretend to be someone else, someone who hadn't watched the love of her life bleed out in her arms, someone who still believed in the possibility of happy endings. As they crossed into Utah, the radio crackled to life, with a late-night DJ spinning records for the sleepless and the traveling. The first song was something mellow and forgettable, but the second made Lily's breath catch in her throat. Sam Cooke's voice filled the bus, warm and hopeful, and achingly familiar. Marcus had loved this song, had played it on his guitar during one of their afternoons in Golden Gate Park. He'd sung along in his rich baritone, his eyes closed, lost in the music's promise of better days to come. Listening to it now, Lily could almost hear his voice harmonizing with Sam's, could almost feel his hand in hers. The tears came then, quiet and steady, streaming down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead against the cool window. But for the first time since Altamont, they weren't tears of pure despair. There was something else mixed in. A fragile hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than grief. Marcus was gone, and nothing would ever change that. The men who killed him would face no justice, would probably never even remember his name. The world would go on spinning, indifferent to the love story that had ended in blood and dust, at a concert that was supposed to celebrate peace. But she was still here. She was still breathing, still capable of loving and being loved, still able to write poems and read books and watch sunsets, paint the sky in impossible colors. Marcus's death had stolen many things from her, but it hadn't stolen everything. There were still songs to be written, still stories to be told, still small acts of kindness that could push back against the darkness. The bus rolled through the night, carrying her toward whatever came next. She didn't know where she would end up, what name she would give herself, what life she would build from the pieces of the old one. But she knew she would carry Marcus with her, not as a wound that would never heal, but as a light that would guide her through whatever darkness lay ahead. By the time the song ended, Lily had made a decision. She pulled out her notebook and began to write, her words flowing across the page like water, finding its way to the sea. This is the story of Marcus Johnson and Lily Sanders, two kids who fell in love in 1969 and thought that might be enough to change the world. This is the story of how they met in a record store, trading albums and arguments about music and meaning. This is the story of how they found each other in the space between Motown and rock and roll, in the gap between what was and what could be. This is the story of how love bloomed in Golden Gate Park under an oak tree, how it grew strong enough to survive family disapproval and social pressure and the weight of history itself. This is the story of how that love was murdered at Altamont Speedway by men who couldn't bear to see it exist. But this is also the story of how love survives, even after death, how it lives on in memory and music, and the promise that somewhere, someday, the world might become worthy of the dreams we dare to dream. This is their song, the one Marcus never got to finish. I'm writing it now, and I'll keep writing it until the day I die, because some stories are too important to be forgotten, and some love is too pure to be erased by hatred. This is the story of us. The bus rolled on through the darkness, and Lily kept writing, pouring her heart onto the page. Outside the window, America slept under a blanket of stars, vast and troubled and beautiful in its imperfection. Somewhere in that vastness, she would find her place, would build a new life from the ashes of the old. But she would never forget the boy who'd loved her enough to die for it, or the dream they'd shared of a world where love could conquer hate. That dream had died at Altamont, but dreams had a way of being reborn, taking new shapes, finding new dreamers to carry them forward. Sam Cooke's voice echoed in her memory as the bus carried her east, toward the dawn, toward whatever came next. Change was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Maybe not the change they'd hoped for, maybe not the change they'd died for, but change nonetheless. And in that possibility, in that stubborn refusal to surrender to despair, Marcus's song lived on, unfinished but not forgotten, silenced but not lost, waiting for the day when someone else would pick up the melody and carry it forward into whatever tomorrow might bring. The stars wheeled overhead, and the bus rolled on, and Lily Sanders wrote her love story in the darkness, one word at a time, keeping faith with the dead and the living alike. Epilogue. San Francisco Chronicle, December 6, 1999. 30 years later. Remembering Altamont by Lily Sanders Morrison. 30 years ago today, I watched the boy I loved die in my arms at Altamont Speedway. His name was Marcus Johnson, and he was 17 years old, with dreams as big as the California sky, and a voice that could make angels weep. The history books will tell you that a young black man named Meredith Hunter was killed that day by Hell's Angels, acting in self-defense. But I was there. I saw what really happened. I held Marcus as his life bled into the dirt, and I heard his last words. "You're my song, Lil. You always were." For 30 years, I've carried that song with me. Unfinished, but not forgotten. I've sung it in the classrooms where I've taught, in the books I've written, in the quiet moments when I still wake up thinking I can hear his guitar. Marcus Johnson was not a statistic. He was not a cautionary tale. He was a young man who believed that music could heal the world's wounds, who treated every person with dignity, who dared to love across the lines the world drew between us. His death marked the end of one dream, the dream of peace and love conquering hatred through flower power and good intentions. But it was also the beginning of something else, the understanding that real change requires more than songs and symbols. It requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to keep fighting, even when the world breaks your heart. Today, as I watch my own children, Marcus's children, in spirit if not in blood, navigate a world that is both better and worse than the one we dreamed of in 1969. I think about the song he never finished writing. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the song was never meant to be finished by one voice, but to be picked up and carried forward by all of us, one note at a time, one generation at a time. This is his song. This is our song. And as long as there are people willing to love across the lines of division, as long as there are dreamers who refuse to accept the world as it is and insist on imagining what it could be, the music will go on. Marcus Johnson, 17 years old, lover of Motown and dreams, and a girl who still misses him every day. His song lives on. The end. Author's note: this novel is a work of fiction inspired by the tragic events at the Altamont Free Concert on December 6, 1969. While the characters of Marcus Johnson and Lily Sanders are fictional, their story is dedicated to the memory of Meredith Hunter and all those who have died for the crime of loving across the lines the world draws between us. May their songs live on. Altamont.